Hello, everybody, and thank you for watching or listening to the Positive Talk Hour. And I have an amazing guest on today. His name is Dr. Edward Bynum. His work is extraordinary. It's the book that we're going to be talking about is The Dream Life of Families and Psychospiritual Connection. And it's interesting, I've been on this year-long or actually lifelong journey of studying psychology, and he takes it into a different direction than a lot of people think about when it comes into the dreams and the connection between families and close friends. Dr. Bynum, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good, Jeremy. How are you doing? And how is the audience out there doing?
I'm sure they're doing great. They love this. They love learning about themselves and learning about the connection between people they love and stuff like that. So I'm sure they're doing amazing. So
great. Well, hopefully we were able to get into that because that was the total focus of what I was trying to do with the research and the writing, was to talk about not only the way people are obviously connected, we're all connected to each other, but also some of the more, subtle and not so easily seen ways that we're connected to each other, not only consciously, but also unconsciously and through our dreams.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Like I've studied so much in metaphysics, and dreams has not been my area. And now looking through your area, your content, maybe I should rethink that, or maybe I'm just coming into it. What made you, with your profession, start diving into the dream life and stuff like that? What took you in down that path and that journey?
Well, I'd always been, interested in dreams ever since I was a kid. If you remember your dreams, you find them really fascinating and interesting. They have all kinds of strange and unusual circumstances, but then they're all stirred in together with stuff that you kind of commonly know. It's like the movie you go to every night when you go to sleep. So I was always kind of fascinated with that as a kid, but it wasn't until I got actually into college that I started reading about dreams. I mean, sort of like what they sort of meant. And of course, the first person I started reading about in a serious kind of way was Sigmund Freud and his contribution to dreams, and then Carl Jung. And I just kept that interest going. But there was nothing to do with it other than my personal interest. But when I got to graduate school, I said, hey, man, why don't you start getting serious about this, writing your dreams down, which I had done in a sketchy way before that time, but writing your dreams down, look at the categories of things that keep coming up, and do a serious study of it. And a funny thing that happened? As soon as I did that, as soon as I said, okay, Bruce, write your dreams down. As soon as I did that, because I remember one summer, as soon as I did that, I didn't have a dream that I could remember for about 4 or 5 months. My repression just came right in and just blocked it out.
Oh, wow.
It's kind of interesting. And then in bits and pieces, it started coming back. And by 8 months or so after that, I was having my full night regimen of dreams again. And then, so in graduate school, I started studying about them, reading about them, and found them incredibly fascinating from a personal, individual point of view. And then, when I was doing a postdoctoral internship in psychology in Connecticut, a small private hospital, I started noticing interesting correspondences between families. We were doing family therapy, and that's where you do therapy not just with the individual, but with the whole family. And I started noticing how families sort of sometimes would have the same physical and emotional symptoms. And I thought that was really fascinating. And then it dawned on me one day, I wonder how much correspondence there is in their dreams to what's also going on with other people's dreams, since they share the same physical symptoms and sometimes they share the same emotional symptoms. Maybe they sometimes share the same images in dreams. So I asked folks in the family to write down their dreams in a dream log for me. Don't share them with each other. Just write them down for me and humor me, because I was sort of interested in this. Well, lo and behold, people started in family groups writing these down, and I started noticing all these intimate correspondences, images, events, times, places, situations, good and bad, tragic and happy, occurring in people's dreams within the same family. And I just sort of like was blown away by that. And so I started doing it more and more with different families. I put out requests over the in magazines to sort of folks to send me their individual dreams or family dreams. And I started this thing called a Family Dreams Research Project. Family Dreams Research Project. And I literally, over about 5 or 6 years, collected hundreds and hundreds of dreams about individuals, about their family, or dreams in which 3 or 4 members of the family had the same experience. And that formed the empirical basis for the later work on the dream life of families. And it was just fascinating. You know, sometimes families were going through a really intense thing like adult children of alcoholics, and there'd be certain kind of patterns that would emerge there. And sometimes people going through the whole family pregnancy cycle. And I noticed that different kinds of thematic dreams would come up around the pregnancy by different people in the same family about the same event. Sometimes, of course, around death. And sometimes there were some things that just didn't, at the time, didn't make any sense to me. Like I would start getting dreams about precognitive experiences. That's where you kind of have a dream about something, and then later on it turns out to be true. And then sometimes telepathic dreams, crisis telepathy, you know, where someone is in a near-death or crisis situation and very agitated, and then someone who's in a more passive state, you know, dreaming, meditating, resting, whatever, all of a sudden would think about that person in their dream or have an image of them. And so that's crisis telepathy. So all of this was just going on in people's dream life and stuff. So I felt, you know, compelled to, you know, put myself out there and collate that information and see what else the public thought about it. So the net effect was the dream life of families.
Nice. Well, I find interesting, and maybe if, well, I don't even want to say that. I know that it's doing and interviewing so many authors doing, you know, similar work. Maybe not exactly like you, but interviewing like Raymond Moody with his near-death experiences and stuff like that.
Yeah.
He even, I mean, as much as he was attacked on certain levels, there were so many people that I'm sure you even witnessed that were so interested and were having all these having all these experiences. And it seems like your work is over many years. It's not just, you know, you mentioned 6 years, but it seems like it's been over you know, almost a lifetime.
It's a lifetime of interest, and then a good serious part of the whole professional life sort of devoted to this and other things. And I had a similar experience to Raymond, and we've talked about his early experiences, you know, when he would present the near-death experience. I remember hearing him speak directly, first of all, at one of our APA, American Psychological Association meetings, and he presented his stuff, and you know, half the audience was very, very skeptical and sort of, you know, well, maybe, I don't know about that, and the others were fascinated, and I was one of those who was fascinated. Yeah. And then later on, you know, I got to know him in a more personal context, and we were able to discuss more of his work and some of the resistance he found, but you know, he knew what he was talking about, and he knew there were enough people out there that had similar or parallel experiences. And so he made a phenomenal, from my point of view, just a simply phenomenal contribution to not only psychological and psychiatric literature, et cetera, but also just to general culture. He just opened up the whole thing. With near-death experiences, and it's just going into the light. I mean, you know, and Raymond connected that to clinical sciences, and later on, other people picked up the mantle and connected it to some of the ancient books and texts that talked about the same sort of phenomena from a different point of view. Yeah. So Raymond is he's one of my heroes, that's for sure.
You and me both. He's helped me through a couple things, and on a personal level as well, he's pretty extraordinary. But I was just thinking about this because I know you talk about you know, pregnancy and dreams and stuff like that. So I've actually talked to people that have actually like grandparents that see a couple getting together. A young couple is married. It's like their children, and they see them get together, and they actually have dreams about their child or their grandchild coming forward, and they actually
Yes.
have had dreams about it being, for those that believe in, us being reborn, reincarnation. They've actually had dreams about it being somebody that was part of the family before, and
Oh
being
yeah.
reborn into. I mean, I don't know how many experiences you've had with people submitting their dreams like that or talking to people.
I have. I've had not a huge number, but enough to make a nexus, enough to turn my attention to it, such that I've been exploring it as one of the avenues of this whole phenomenon.
Mm.
Um, actually, now that I think about it, there's a certain section in Dream Life of Families in which I mention this phenomenon and the research, by the way, because there's hardcore research about this in the medical schools, about the reincarnation. And it's just that because it doesn't fit into our present world view, it tends to be ignored. But it's there. There's a guy at University of Virginia Medical School named Ian Stevenson, a physician, and he devoted the second half of his career to this. And he went all over the world collecting uh, thousands and thousands of cases of this. And he had a research team associated with him right there at Duke University. And he had associates all over the earth. And so they collected it, literally hundreds and hundreds of documented cases, hardcore evidence. And it's right there. And so I brought up his research about this, and I put it within the family unconscious context, and hopefully was able to sort of bring some of that forward. But it's there, and people do dream about it, and people sometimes have memories of themselves in a prior lifetime, but it's almost always connected in some way with some sort of familial context. And it is most easily recognizable to us, anyway, in terms of people's dreams, in terms of traits and attitudes that people can have, and sometimes physical symptoms. Yes, physical symptoms and marks on the body that people have based upon their prior life experiences that are, again, I want to underline this, been documented in other records. So it's a fascinating area, and I really believe that we are on the verge of sort of expanding our just normal conventional consciousness to as a society and as a culture to sort of open our minds to that. Well, way back at the beginning of the last century, not this century, but the last century, 20th century, Freud and Jung and a number of these guys opened up people's way of looking at stuff so that they realized that there wasn't only their conscious mind that was sort of like driving in the front seat of the car, but also that there was an unconscious mind, a deep reservoir of an unconscious mind that had all kinds of phenomena associated with it. Well, I think that right now, you and I and folks listening and lots of others are on the cusp of opening up a whole new level of mind that the ancients in ancient Egypt and India and Tibet referred to as the super conscious mind. The super conscious mind. Yes, and that envelops not only our personal unconscious, but the collective unconscious of our society and species, and also the superconscious of other sentient conscious beings on the planet. And we're going to go through major transformations. We are now, but I think it's going to get much more coherent as we move along. And so I'm excited to be part of that. And I think other folks who are listening, and you obviously, are very excited about it also.
Yeah, there's just so much. I mean, I started studying this because I was just fascinated. I was fascinated with the psychic phenomenon back in my early 20s, and so it's been 20 some odd years later because I wanted to understand. And then I found out that when I would get in these crowds of people and I had anxiety, I didn't need anxiety medicine. I needed to find out why I was empathy. I had this strong empathy for people, and I was feeling all their emotions, and so then I had to
Right.
study that phenomenon. And then, and the nightmares I would have as a child, and when I had a fairly decent childhood, and I couldn't understand why, I had these, but there's past life connections. There's so
Yes,
many
there
things.
are.
So, and I
Yes,
think that
there are.
if you just think of yourself as this body, then you don't really fully understand why you're having these experiences, and you kind of get
Right.
lost in them. So,
Right. That's the old bag of bones theory. All that
yeah,
I am is a bag of bones. And if you listen to most of the, I don't know, propaganda, I guess, of contemporary science, everything can be reduced down to physical matter and the day-to-day physical matter that we see. And and then they're always pointing to the physicists, and they say that's what it is. Well, if you talk to the physicists, the quantum physicists, the quantum relativistic physicists, they say, we left that a century ago. They don't harbor that anymore. They recognize that the world is basically at bottom. All of it is light. You know that formula E equals MC squared?
yeah,
People sort of like mouth it off. Oh yeah, it's all light, it's all energy, blah 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 blah. They don't really, really, really let that sink in, because if you let it sink in, you realize that if you are light, including your own brain is ultimately light. That means it's interconnected with all the other forms of light in the cosmos also. And
mm,
so that will definitely begin to tickle your intuition to realize that you're more than your physical body that you see. That, if the physicists are right, and they have been for the last 120 years, all matter is trans-temporal and trans-spatial. And all we see is the most dense, the most localized, the most obvious aspect of it with our physical eyes, but really extends out all over, beneath us and beyond us,
right.
It really does. And so that our sense of identity begins to change also.
Yeah, it really changes a lot. Now, a lot
Oh,
of the
yeah.
nexus thing. So when we're talking about families, and I'm just thinking about the level of what when we get into the dream life of families. I mean, there's so many things that I was just kind of skimming through and going back and looking at something that I'd read before. Um, the family dreams of adult children, alcoholics, and stuff like that. So, traditionally, in like an alcoholic parent, there might be a lack of attention or even abuse in that,
Right,
and that
sometimes.
sometimes, or whatever there's going on in the family. What what are some of the things that you've seen in the dreams that, I mean, I'm assuming you've used this for therapy, the dreams to
Yes.
show the family, and help them with therapy when, helping with the family and the alcoholic parent or whatever. How does that manifest in the dream, or how have you seen that manifest in the dreams of the
Well,
family?
I'll give you an example that actually
Uh,
came out of a family therapy case. I was working with a family at the hospital, and this is one of the families that I asked them to keep a dream log for me. And the family consisted of a mother, and she had two daughters, one an early teenage daughter and one who was a preteen. And then there was a father. Well, in this situation, the father was the person who was the active alcoholic, and he would sometimes he'd be okay, but then he could be very controlling, and he could be explosive at times.
right.
And they lived in fear of him, but they didn't quite know what to do about it. Plus, he was a very intensely uh, a religious person, in the sense that he was very controlling. It's
Mm,
not that religion is controlling, but that he as a personality was. So I collected their dreams. They offered them to me when I requested it, and we were able to use their dreams in therapy. And all of them had a different vision of this. There would be a sort of a vaguely familiar man, but his face was not clear, running around, uh, screaming and yelling and stomping on everybody. And the oldest daughter, who was just emerging into puberty, felt that he would, be running after her, and she would almost escape. And then just as she escaped, her car would run headlong into a tree, and she'd be killed.
Oh, wow.
The other daughter felt that this large, awful man ran around with huge shoes trying to squash her. And the mother had similar dreams. Well, you can see that they all had this different take, a different sort of holographic perception, but they shared the same emotional feeling, and they had the same vision of some dominating person trying to control them and crush them. And so in a teasing, gentle way, I was able to bring that up in therapy, and he was able to see the influence that he did not intend, but that was having on the rest of his family. And
Wow.
they were able to find a way to talk to him. So that's how we were able to use those collected family dreams in a family therapy session. And that's just one of many examples laid out I tried to lay out as best I could anyway, in the Dream Life of Families. But that is right out of the clinical, the clinical files. Oh yeah.
So basically, in his mind, he was controlling, but he didn't even perceive it that way. He was maybe
he didn't perceive it that way at all. He perceived it as being very protective, caring for, nurturing, and shielding them from the hostile outside world. But that was not their experience. Their experience was he was dominating and crushing them.
Yeah.
And so it was a revelation for him to see that, because he was coming in his heart from a good place.
Yeah.
But they had to find a way to sort of say that. And so it was a very moving, and didn't just happen in one session, it happened over many sessions, obviously. But that was what we sort of worked on. So that was one particular example of how that, right out of the clinical files, we use those family dreams as part of the family unconscious to get them to sort of expand and open up and move beyond that point.
So basically, this is a classic case of their internal projections manifested into their dreams to show them their truest feelings, and they might not even be able to verbalize it until.
Well, they couldn't verbalize it. But they could dream about it, but they couldn't verbalize it. And they certainly couldn't say it to him because they were frightened.
Wow,
they were frightened.
That's an interesting that happens, and it's kind of in a codependent situation in some ways.
Exactly. That's exactly the words. Yes.
So one of the things that I know for sure is dreams, of course, have been very prophetic. And we've people have had these things where, you think about what is it? I'm trying to think of. Well, even in Revelations of the Bible, he's having dreams, and of things. But there's also just different I'm trying to think of the dreams of Hermes, I guess, and the Emerald Tablets is the ones that's popping into my head.
Oh, yes.
and those are founded in his dreams, and he's having some pretty prophetic things that are going on there. But that's happened throughout history and ancient history. Where
that has. I mean, folks may be familiar with the sort of classical situation of now that we're talking about the Bible, of Joseph in the Bible in the Old Testament, and he's sold into slavery by his brothers, of course, and get that family connection there because they're jealous of him because he's their father's favorite. Well, he's sold into slavery in Egypt, and he ends up apparently in a prison cell with a disgraced or fallen high priest, I believe, of the Pharaoh, who is out of favor for a while. And he interprets some of the dreams of the priest, and the priest is moved by them. And then eventually, the priest gets back into the good favor of the Pharaoh. But when the priest does, he tells the Pharaoh, this guy he met in prison. And so Pharaoh says, really? Well, so he brings the guy forward, Joseph. And the Pharaoh has had a dream. And he dreams of 7 fat cows and 7 lean cows. And the Pharaoh can't figure out what does this mean? And Pharaoh interprets it that, in Egypt there's going to be a famine. 7 lean, very lean years after 7 very profitable or fat years. And so the Pharaoh takes the advice in the interpretation of Joseph and stocks up the grains and till they have a surplus. And then when the 7 lean years hit, they are able to sort of feed their people. And a lot of the enemies of Egypt had to come to Egypt to get food from the grain storage. So that's one of those cases in which the correct interpretation, prophetic interpretation, precognitive interpretation of a dream changed the course of history.
That's interesting. There's so many of those type of dreams in history.
Oh, there are. Oh, yeah.
You actually talk about this. I think it's called the African Cradle.
Yes.
I have to go back and find that in the book. And so, and that's more of a tradition, basically, of a dream. Am I correct? Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, it's close, but not exactly. What I was referring to, the African Cradle, is I was going back in history to what the modern archaeologists, paleontologists, and geneticists tell us that human beings, all of us, began in Africa, and then we sort of spread out, starting about maybe a little bit more than 1 million years ago. And we spread all over the continent. And then our species, you and I, Homo sapiens sapiens, thinking man, we also began in Africa about 150 to 200,000 years ago. And we were another wave of hominids that left Africa and populated the rest of the earth. All the rest of those types of hominids have died off and been killed off. And we're the only ones left, Homo sapiens sapiens. Well, civilization, the first cities, the first empires, the first writing, the first metallurgy, the first tall buildings and so forth also began in the Nile Valley of Egypt. So that's why I refer to it as the African Cradle. And then it spreads to the Middle East. This is about, depending on who you read, it could be as late as 4 to 5,000 BC, before the Common Era, before Christ. But a lot of geological evidence, such as the building of the pyramids and the Sphinx, indicate that probably those were built around 12,000 BC, right after the last ice age. Why? There are, around the Great Pyramid, there are signs that the river Nile was actually much further west than where the pyramids are now, that the river used to come up, right up to the pyramid. Mm-hmm. And also even the Sphinx has water erosion marks on it. You don't get water erosion marks in a desert. So it shows that it was built way, way before that. And the last big lush times of the savannas was closer to 8,000 to 12,000 years ago. And even the Egyptians themselves, even they talk about their own history. Not what some Egyptologist at Boston University says, but what they say is their civilization began around 12,000 BC, before the Common Era, before Christ. So that's why I refer to it as the African Cradle, but it's all associated with that area. First in Egypt, and then moving out to the Middle East and spreading all over the earth. So we're all interconnected. We're all interconnected with each other.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the dreams really tell us this. I don't know if it was a dream, but I've had some pretty profound things happen to me in deep meditation, where I would have thought I'd go into a theta level of consciousness. And, I've had things where I've actually just seen us all as like dots of light interconnected and beams of light connecting all of us.
Yeah, well, we are.
And that's what when you talk about we're all light. Yeah, that was my first stage of realizing, whoa, we're all light.
That's right.
So
that's right. That's right. And that is the luminous and also subliminal perception that all human beings, all of us, have and share. If we can sort of quiet our minds enough and use the right effective meditation techniques for our particular type of mind. That's why there's so many different kind of meditation techniques, because, different strokes for different folks,
Mm-hmm.
and some of us respond to one method better than another. That's fine. Find whatever works for you. But if you can quiet your mind enough, then you can see it in meditation, and you can see it in your dream life. It's right there. It's a perceptual issue. All the different techniques of meditation and so forth, they're all detergent, literally. They're detergent to try and quiet and clean your mind so that you can see what's already there more clearly.
Yeah.
It's like a windshield wiper, Got to get all the dirt off the window so you can see what's outside and what's inside.
That's a good way to look at it. That makes a whole lot of sense. I told somebody recently, because they were like, "Well, I can't quiet my mind." I said, physically, your mind actually still has to work, because if it stopped, your body, your heart would stop functioning and your lungs would stop functioning. It's still got to make those work. But we're talking about the quieting enough to where you can get into your super consciousness.
Yes, right. That's right. And that's a matter of methodology. And there are lots of different methods out there. And you don't have to make your mind totally absent. That you really don't. You just have to quiet it down so that you can begin to sort of notice the other stuff going on, And the techniques are to fixate the mind on something so that you can see the things around that are there. It just takes a while to sort of see it.
Yeah.
It does. But this is everybody's birthright. Everybody, my birthright is your birthright. Everybody listening to this is our birthright. And you come quickly or you come slowly, but you definitely want to come to it.
You talk about in the book, you talk about the goodbyes that people have, in their dreams about, deaths, and like a family member that passes away on the middle of the night. And I've actually had an experience with that where I was actually laying in the same room in her hospice room as my mother. And she had I was sleeping and I heard her say, "Jer, if you want to say goodbye to me, you got to get up. You got to wake up now."
Yeah.
And, so I didn't wake up because I was in the mind of a teenage, I was in my 30s, but the teenage boy that's like, yeah, Mom, I'll wake up in a second. That was kind of my attitude.
Right.
And her assistant actually knocked on the door, because my mother was a hospice nurse and worked for hospice, and came in to say goodbye to her. And that woke me up enough to be able to say goodbye. And it's interesting.
Right.
You talk about this, I also had a feeling of being raised up out of my body when she left her body, which I equated to being a shared death experience. But
yes, and also shared death experience, and also her message to you.
Yeah.
Also her message to you, and that she was saying essentially goodbye to you in the particular dimension that you both shared. But she then moved on to a different phase of her life.
Right.
She was a being of light, just like you and me. And
Right.
when she dropped the physical sheath, she entered into the more subtle sheath of light. Well, you and I have that subtle sheath of light around us also. It's just that it's out. It's just that it's sort of held down or encumbered by our thicker, denser physical self. But we have many bodies enfolded within each other. And she moved on to a more subtle one.
Yeah, I think
but I had a similar experience with my own father. He died suddenly, and we all gathered in the house a few days later to go through the whole mourning process. And I knew that he would appear to me in a dream, because I knew enough about dreaming by that point that he was going to make an appearance. And he did. He did, except he died suddenly. And so in an interesting sort of way, I was aware when we sort of met in the dream that he had died, and he did not know.
Wow.
He did not know. And so I had to sort of inform him that, Dad, you died. What are you talking about? I did kind of explain it to him. And then I sort of gradually ushered him over toward the window and toward the light, and we both rose up for a while, and the light became progressively more intense, and I could not, endure the light anymore. It was too bright for me, and so I fell back, and he went on. That's a true story. And I've written about that. I'm out there about it. But yes, that was my experience. And I'm sure that was his experience. And hundreds of thousands of other people. Hear that? Hundreds of thousands of other people living right now have had that experience. And you and I are going to have that experience when we pass out of this physical body too. So it's the fool that does not prepare for that.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, I had a very vast understanding of it because she was a hospice nurse, and she had story after story after story about family members.
Oh yes.
And then, of
Oh
course,
yeah.
she's literally, because we had been studying this for years before she became a hospice nurse, she's actually seen people step out of their body and walk out of their body. And she's like, oh. And they'd still be breathing. The physical body would still be breathing, but the soul wouldn't be there. So
nope, it was preparing to leave.
Yeah.
It was preparing to leave. And so, yeah, and she was fortunate enough to have seen that numerous times. So when her time came, she was not terrified. She was able to go gracefully. That's kind of nice.
Yeah, it was. I was more scared than she was.
Yeah, she was not afraid. It was nice. It was sad and painful, but it wasn't terrifying,
Yeah. It's interesting. It's fascinating when we really start diving in and just opening our mind. Like you mentioned, said that's the fool that doesn't prepare. And so when we study this, we start to prepare ourselves for this unknown thing that we're afraid of. And the ancients weren't afraid of death. They had a very different understanding of what death was. So
those ancients who were initiated, you're right.
That's true.
The ancients who weren't initiated were probably as scared as most of us walking around about it. But I'm talking about those who were initiated or had some deep belief or had some experience of one kind or another.
Yeah.
The ancient Egyptians, they used to.
Dr. Bynum, are you still there? Hello? Hello? Okay, everybody, we're back, and there was a little break in the recording. So we were talking about family dreams and death, and I had mentioned, the experience I had with my mother, and Dr. Bynum had mentioned the experience he had with his father, and then we were kind of diving into that area, and I think we were even talking about, we were talking about the Egyptians, the initiation of the understanding that they have, the people that were initiated.
We were talking about how the Egyptians actually would practice for their death and resurrection and enter into a new life. The pyramids, the three great pyramids of the Giza Plateau, are the only ones that we know of today. But there are dozens of other pyramids, ruins, and some pyramids under the sand that have been uncovered by modern satellite technology that shows there were many other pyramids, large pyramids. Well, in these pyramids, you don't find any bones of pharaohs or people like that. That's a myth. Never any bones. These are not tombs for the pharaohs and their ego. The pharaohs were buried with their families in the valleys of the kings. No, these were places of initiation. So those sarcophagi, queen's chambers, king's chambers, people would, with the direction of the elders and the priests, would get into them after the preparation, and they would use incantation, hypnosis, autogenics, various other techniques to induce a profound state of hypnosis and out-of-body experience, and travel experience. The body would be rigid, and the mind would be able to zoom and leave. And we can do that today. Actually, it's not as hard as you might think. But they did it, and this was to prove unequivocally to the neophyte that there was a soul, and this soul was a being of light and could move and was not confined or imprisoned totally and completely within the physical body. And what a difference from today, where if you go to most official physicians, they will say officially there is no soul, or if there is, it's a murky thing. It's somehow associated with the brain, and they'll leave it alone. But in the ancient world, they not only knew it, they explored it, and they were able to empirically, underline the word empirically, demonstrate that to their person who was initiated. And the same sort of phenomena happened in many of the mystery societies of West Africa that migrated over from ancient Egypt. And I'm sure it's happened in other places in the world, and not only by the shamans, but by ordinary people like you and me. So, yes, it is going to happen. And the closest we get to it these days, is in emergency rooms or hospitals where people have a near-death experience, NDE, where there's that separation from the body. They are clinically dead for a while, including brain flat-lined, and then they are revived medically. And then people will tell us of their experience. Mm-hmm. And this has happened thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of times in medical situations right here in the U.S. of A and in Europe and in other places in the world. So it is real. It is a real phenomenon, and it is something that is worth exploring because all of us, you, me, and everybody listening, is going to have this experience someday. So we're bigger and greater and more luminous than modern science, conventional science has led us to believe. And in point of fact, the science of the physicists indicates that this is the case. The quantum physicists, the relativistic physicists, they say that we are all actually forms of light, including our bodies, including our brains. So that should tell us something about what we really are. And therefore, hopefully not be imprisoned in these thought forms that tell us that we are just our physical bodies. Yeah. The physical body that we know of on a day-to-day basis when we're sitting down and eating our bowl of cornflakes in the morning.
Although I do like my cornflakes in the morning.
I like my cornflakes too. I like my cornflakes too. I'm more than a bowl of cornflakes.
Yeah, and I think I was just pondering this the other day because I think we get into this. You and I understand that we're more than this physical self, and we also are this physical self. And there are some times where people get really caught up and say, "Well, we're not that." And I'm like, "Well, we're all things. You know, we're light."
Yeah, we're all things. Yeah, they don't contradict each other. They don't contradict each other.
Yeah. You know,
they don't contradict each other.
I was looking up to find your site, and the only one I see is the University of Mass Amherst. Your looks like your profile for director of behavioral medicine. But do you have a website where they can find you?
Well, I certainly have a website, www.obelixfoundation.com. But the easiest way is you just go directly to Amazon, the big Amazon thing, and you look up author's page. My name, Edward Bruce Bynum, at Amazon. And you'll find all that stuff will just come up there, and that'll lead you to several different sites. And you may pick one of that may be of interest to you. But one of them, that's the author's page, has all of this stuff listed. And I think that's easier to do, and it just helps people kind of pick and choose where they want to kind of like go. Because I've done things on dreams, I've done things on ancient Egypt, I've done things on just regular old clinical stuff, hypnosis and family therapy and so on. So, different strokes for different folks. And so the Amazon authors page, Edward Bruce Bynum, and then you can sort of take it from there.
I just saw you have a book called Godzilla Nanda, His Life and Vision.
Yeah, that's a book of poetry. Yeah, I've got 5 books of poetry out there, Godzilla Nanda being one of them. But actually, now that you mention it, just last week, I was able to release, after a number of years of working on a quartet, actually, of 4 different volumes of poetry. One called The First Bird, Songs of the Dark Body in Flight, another one called The Luminous Heretic, for obvious reasons, another one called Gospel of the Dark Orisha, and also one on Magdalene poems, subtitled The Love Letters of Jesus the Christ and Mary Magdalene. So that's all literary poetry stuff. Okay, we've been talking about we've been talking about the Dream Life of Families that came out just last year, and that's right out of, well, you can get that on Amazon or any place. But also Dark Light Consciousness, where we're talking about the body. You and I have been talking about the physical body and the different levels of the physical body. And I went into a good amount of detail about that in Dark Light Consciousness. So folks might be interested in that. And there's some other ones there, if they tickles their fancy. But you and I have been talking about mostly the dream life of families and the book Dark Light Consciousness.
Nice.
But it's very close to me, and that's where I put a lot of my professional and emotional juice is in those.
Well, it's fascinating stuff. And for those that are listening, as always, I'll be putting links to his the book we've been talking about and a link to his author page on Amazon. So you can definitely look him up. There's a wealth of information about things that on this show we explore, the subconscious quite a bit, because that's been my nature of study for many, many years, and what I've been fascinated with. So definitely the last few minutes here, Dr. Bynum, is there anything that you would like to talk about before, maybe we didn't cover throughout the interview?
Well, the only thing I guess I would want to sort of emphasize is that, you and I have been talking about this, and we've been, obviously, you've been engaged in this for a long time, and so have I. But this is not at all far removed from what just the overwhelming majority of people are really interested in. They may not articulate it as well or do as much reading about it or that sort of thing, or have as much time and energy to devote to it. But it is a core, deep stuff that everybody walking around on the planet is profoundly aware of. Whether you're in Vietnam, China, Angola, Russia, Siberia, Mexico City, all of us share this because we're all humans. And so I'm hoping that it wasn't presented in such a way that was too academic for folks. This is the blood of the life that all of us live, the breath of the life of all of us live. And I think it's totally okay, totally acceptable to take a deep and profound interest in it, because if you do, you're going to find the person you're sitting next to also has the same interest. And then that opens up a whole universe between the two of you about things that go beyond what you're just sitting down to talk about.
Absolutely.
We're all much wider and larger than we imagine.
Yeah, that's really cool when we start expanding that we're not the raisin in the galaxy, so to speak. We're much, much more. So
much more.
Very cool. Well, everybody, thank you for listening. And Dr. Bynum, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been very much a pleasure, and I'm sure that we'll have you on again in the future, because the topic is very, very interesting. And
I very much appreciated it, Jeremy, and a chance to reach out and contact folks. And I hope folks pick it up and find that this is really about me, isn't it?
It definitely is, because it's about all of us. So
that's right. That's cool. Right. This is about all me, all of us. Yeah. No matter where we are.
Well, everybody have an amazing week, and I'll be having a whole array of guests I've got booked up over the next month and a half that I'll be putting up here very shortly. So everybody have a blessed day.